During the storm, the Duke asked the young humble girl for shelter. But what happened that night? Rain flew sideways across the open moor, 1,000 needles driven by a hard western wind. A lone rider bent low over his horse's neck and let the animal choose the line of ground that would not break its legs. Water ran from the brim of his hat and struck his cheekbone like thrown grit. The horse shied once at a crack of white fire on the horizon, and then pushed into the dark again, ears pinned, breath hot and loud. He saw the cottage by its stubborn light. A single candle, steady in a small window, made a square of gold on rain and stone. He drew rein and felt the animal quiver under him, all mud and heaving lungs, a good creature that had given more than it should. He slid down, boots sinking to the ankle, and put a hand to the horse's damp neck. The wind made the old thatch lift like fur along a creature's spine. He led the horse under the short lean-to, wedged the reins around a peg by habit, and went to the door. He had to put his shoulder to it. The latch fought him as if the house itself had taken sides with the storm. He knocked with gloved knuckles, then with the heel of his hand, and the sound went sideways in the wind. He knocked again, and felt the slick of blood on his temple where a branch had scored him in the dark. When the door opened, it opened a hand's breadth, and a woman's voice said nothing at all. Only the weather spoke. He lifted his hands away from his body to show he held no weapon, and said the single word a stranger may say when he has no right to ask for more. Shelter. The door widened. She was young, wrapped in a shawl, her hair braided and looped back to keep it clear of the work she had been doing. Behind her, a child slept on a narrow bed, a quilt stitched from squares of use and frugality. A banked fire kept the room at the edge of warmth, enough to make the wet air rise off him in a visible halo. He wavered in the doorway, letting the wind have the water that could be spared, and then stepped inside, careful not to spill the storm across her floor. "You may leave the boots," she said. By the hearth. Her voice was soft and even, like someone speaking beside a sickbed. He bent to untie laces that were more knot than leather, set the boots in a tidy line, and did not go further without being told. The cottage was one room with a low-back corner, where a curtain made a second space. A table stood under the window with a length of linen stretched across it and thread caught in the cloth. A pot held oats gone to paste. A kettle hissed with the bitter patience of water about to boil. "Thank you." "Shut the door," she said. And he did, pushing until the latch settled home with a sound he liked too well. The wind became a muffled presence, not a hand at his back. He removed his gloves and laid them on the root of the hearth to steam. He had a signet on his right hand, heavy and old, a piece that sat on his knuckle as if it had been made for his blood alone. For a moment, the candle found it and turned it into a small sun. He closed his hand. She watched the ring and watched him close his hand and did not bow. "Sir," she said, that word could be a courtesy or a refusal. "You have a cut." "It is nothing," he said, feeling the sting now that the wind was not taking his attention. A strip of skin grazed at his temple made a bright thread of pain among the cold. She moved to the table, took a clay cup, and poured vinegar and water without looking as if she measured the proportion by habit. A basket under the table yielded a folded piece of linen that had been scoured and dried in the last decent weather. She came close enough that he smelled clean cloth and human skin preserved from the storm by good sense. He did not bend his head without invitation. She raised the cloth and tipped his face with 2 fingers and made the invitation herself. "You'll feel it." He did. The vinegar was sharp and honest and woke the nerves along his brow. Her hands were steady. She worked with attention and without ceremony, the way a surgeon dresses a wound or a mother fixes a child's scraped knee. For a strange second, he had the sense of being properly kept by someone who understood that a man is not his name first, but a body that bleeds, chills, warms again. "Sit," she said, and nudged a stool with her foot to a place where he could be tended and not cast a shadow on the bed. He sat. His coat creaked as the water gave up its hold, making the sound of old leather waking. She lifted a strand of hair from the edge of the cut and smoothed it back. He felt the heat of the hearth on his wet skin and the far-off vibration of thunder flattening into distance. "Are you alone here?" he asked, though the evidence lay within 4 strides. She flicked a glance at the bed. "My sister sleeps. She will not wake for a kettle, not after walking to the churners and back." "I'll keep my coat on me then," he said. She ignored that and stepped past him. The coat came off his shoulders whether he willed it or not, quick and light as if a bird had taken it. She shook it once to rid it of the worst of the wet and laid it over the child. The weight settled across the small body like a dark wing. The child turned her face into the collar and sighed, making the little sound creatures make when they are unconsciously pleased. "Leave it," the woman said to the coat, not to him, and then went to adjust the kettle on the hook. He watched her. Her hands did not tremble when she worked. It was only when they rested that he thought he saw the faintest flutter, a tremor that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with a life that never stopped moving. He looked back at the hearth to keep from staring. The bricks on the back of the firebox were old red clay, some blackened smooth by decades of smoke. On the mantel above the fire, there was a folded packet bound in linen string with a small brown sprig caught under the knot, a piece of heather pressed flat by weight and time. It lay as if it had been laid there for so long the wood had learned its shape. He did not mean to stare at the packet. He looked, and the eye saw what it knew. He saw the wax, pale, gone opaque with years, and the impression within it, a falcon in profile with one wing half lifted. His hand wanted to rise and not touch it. He kept his hand still. "You can have bread," the woman said. "It's yesterday's. It will need the heat. I'll pay for it." Her head turned. That was all. He could not read the expression, but he could read the thought behind it. There are things money buys, and things it wounds by touching. "It's bread," she said, "and there is a storm." He could have said something about fairness or custom. He could have made a point that would make him harmless. He picked up the crust she set near the fire and turned it so both sides would warm. It smelled of oats and a little salt, and he felt foolish for having said the word pay at all. The kettle found its boil. She poured hot water into a small teapot stained by years. She did not waste leaves on a stranger who might be gone when the rain eased and charity curdled into regret. She made tisane with dried mint and a little honey scraped from a jar with a carved spoon. He took the cup and warmed his fingers. The heat crept into him exactly where it was needed. "Thank you," he said again, a second coin placed carefully on a table between them. "You may say that when the floor is not made mud," she said, with no smile, and then glanced down and saw the neatness of his boots by the hearth. "Or now, if you like." He almost laughed. A sound startled in his chest, and then settled, a creature small enough to sit on his ribs and wait. He lifted the cup to his mouth and tasted mint and honey and smoke. The cut on his temple pulsed with his heartbeat, and the pulse steadied. He went to the door. "Where?" she began, primed to object, but he had already set one hand to the latch and braced with his shoulder, then used the other hand to keep the door from banging when the wind made its grab. He stepped out into the lean-to to put his hand on the horse again, to scrape sodden grass from the animal's fetlocks, to pour a little of the kettle water into a trough to take the chill off before the animal drank. He found a rag and rubbed the animal's crest, speaking nothing, offering the steadiness of a palm as reassurance. When he came back in, she had set a second stool by the hearth and moved the table a fraction so that the bed stood more nearly in the fold of warmer air. She did not apologize for rearranging her home around a stranger. She did not say anything at all about how the horse's needs had been put right before his own. He felt the old habits of rank shift under his feet like stones under water. "Do you have a name I may use?" he asked, shutting the door with care. "Anna Fletcher," she said. "You are wet and bleeding. That is all I need to know." "Then you know enough." "You sound like a man used to words doing more than they do," she said, not unkindly, and took the rag he had used on the horse and threw it into a bucket by the door, as if it were an accusation that had been answered. He smiled without showing it. He had been told before that he sounded like a man waiting for an argument to make him useful. He ate the bread she set for him and let the mint drink warm a line through his chest. The room was small, and his presence filled too much of it. He placed his cup on the table and saw the length of linen stretched there, a seam running down the center, small neat stitches that would not be seen beneath a bodice or at a hem, and yet were made with the same care as visible work. "You sew for others," he said. She turned to the cloth as if he had pointed at a child. "I sew for bread and for rent." "There are wages paid for work," he said, because sometimes truths have to be said out loud to be born. "There are wages offered for surrender," she answered, and that was the first moment the room felt colder than the rain. He looked toward the bed again. The child breathed with a steady rhythm, the coat heavy enough to anchor sleep. There was a stray thread caught on the cuff, a bright curl against dark cloth. He reached to pick it off and then left it where it lay. He had learned in other rooms that removing the small signs of life left by others could be a kind of theft. "You needn't be afraid," he said, and knew as he said it that assurance was a thing a man likes to hear himself give. "Of what?" she asked, not mocking. "Of me," he said, and then went on before silence made him a fool. "I will sit on this stool until the storm finds its end. I will not trouble your home beyond that." "Good," she said, his word and hers meeting in a place that was neither invitation nor dismissal. He sat. The minutes settled. The sound of weather went from rage to insistence, a drumbeat on thatch, a line of water down the window. The kettle's hiss softened. The hearth opened its heart wider and gave more heat. The air took on the faint, sweet smell of beeswax, as if some old memory had been warmed. Then he realized the scent came from the packet above the fire, the wax seal waking under the slow rise of temperature. He let his gaze go there because not looking is sometimes more revealing. "Your wax is old," he said, testing. She did not look up. "It was my mother's." He nodded like a man agreeing with a thing that should be left alone. He saw the falcon in the wax and felt a tension run through him like the first current through wire. He kept that current out of his face. "Why did you light a candle when oil is dear and evening was half spent?" he asked, willing the question to sound like simple curiosity. "Because my sister asked if the world had gone, and I wished to show it had not," Anna said. Then she cut a thread and held the end between her teeth a moment. "And because a light in a window can be a map." "For men in storms," he said. "For anyone who needs it," she answered, and did not grant him that the map had been meant for him. He had been the authority in rooms where maps were unrolled and nations slid under rule like cloth. This was a different geography. The coordinates here were bread, water, heat, the weight of a coat on a child, a cut that needed vinegar, a woman's face that did not seed unless the argument made sense. He found the place he needed to stand inside this map and held there. A small humor found them, narrow and light. When he shifted on the stool, it complained like an old uncle. She glanced at the stool as if it had told an impertinent tale. He caught the look and rested his hand on the offending leg, as if to quiet it. The gesture made them both almost smile. "Not much use to a man used to proper chairs," she said, not looking. "I prefer a stool that complains to a chair that lies," he said. "You know chairs that lie?" "I know rooms that do," he said, and then remembered this was not the house for such talk. He went quiet, and so did she, but the air between them had softened. A line of water gathered at the window and released itself as a swift bead, running down and catching candlelight in a quick, bright bulge. The candle burned steadily. Outside, the horse stamped once and shook, spray smacking the lean-to boards. The world contracted to the circle of light in the room and a small semicircle of protection just beyond the door. Anna's eyes went to the coat again, to the way the child's fingers curled under the hem as if she held the edge of the sea. She rose and adjusted the coat a finger's width, a movement so slight it would have been nothing if she were alone. It told him too much. Your coat is a weight we needed, and I know who it belongs to, and I am not afraid to use it. You have a signet, she said, her voice wrong if it had been a question. He flexed his hand. I have a family. And a place in the world that opens doors, she said. Some, he said. She returned to her cloth as if the exchange had accounted for something necessary, and perhaps it had. She did not curtsy. She did not say, my lord. She said, sir, and let it mean exactly what she wished it to mean. He found himself tired, not in the way of exhausted flesh, but in the way of a man who has been thinking for days, months, years, without being put to any honest labor beyond that. He stood, crossed to the door, and set his shoulder against it a moment to feel the push of the world. The latch held. He checked the shutters, not that a country latch could keep out a man determined to come in, but because work done is an answer to helplessness. He put his hand to the beam that ran under the rafters. It was old, sanded smooth by time. A line of soot marked its underside like an old tattoo. You are thorough, Anna said from the table. I like doors that do what they are meant to do. So do I, she said. He turned to the hearth and held his hands to the heat without hogging it. He thought of the paper above the mantel and the impression there, and a word came with a weight that did not need to be spoken. He had learned to keep silent in rooms where silence was currency. Here, silence did not buy him anything. It only saved trouble he was not sure should be saved. He went to the table and returned the crust she had kept for herself. Take it, he said. I have been fed very well by your restraint. You have been fed by bread, she said, but she took it, and that was a small concession he did not discount. He could have gone to sleep sitting up on the stool. The possibility presented itself like a merchant offering an honest trade. Give me the weight behind your eyes, and I'll give you an hour without thinking. He did not take the trade. He watched the rise and fall of the child's shoulder, the fine ash that lifted and settled in the firebox, the slow, minute movement of the seal above the fire as wax softened a fraction that could not be seen without looking for it. He imagined the room in the black of the moor, the way it must appear to any eyes outside, light, warmth, a human outline crossing the glow every few minutes like a clock. He looked at Anna. She sat with her thread drawn through her fingers like a word line by line. The wind eased another degree. The kettle slept. The candle brightened because the room had learned the shape of its dark. You did not ask my name, he said. I asked what I needed, she said. And then, after a time in which he heard his own blood, will you give it, if I ask now? If you like. Later, she said, if the door holds. The corner of his mouth went before the rest of his face, a trait a man's valet would know and perhaps have laughed at in private. He disciplined his mouth and went to sit again. He was a man in a small house where rank pressed against plain walls and found it could not expand to fill the space. He let himself be the size of a man. The rain shifted, not gone but tired. The roof dripped in a slower beat, the way a heart does after a sprint. In that softened sound, another was born. It came so lightly that the ear wanted to pretend it was a change in the wind's voice. It came again and made itself distinct. The squelch of a boot in soft ground, the careful placement of weight where there is water under grass, the scraping whisper of cloth against wet stone outside a window where the candle's glow would carry a long way in night. Both of them lifted their heads in the same breath. The horse under the lean-to blew a short, questioning puff. The sound of foot on peat moved not past but toward the cottage, slow and certain as if some small animal, human, tested the approach in the space between rain beats. The window gave a soft, flat knock as something, lantern or hand, settled against its pane. The candle did not flicker, the air did. Anna stood without sound. He rose as well. Her eyes went to the bed, to the coat, to the latch. She lifted the heaviest chair and fitted it under the handle of the door with the economy of someone who has done this before for wind.
not for men. He stepped to the shutter, laid his palm flat against the wood, and felt not weather, but will on the other side, a presence polite enough to test before it took. He watched the faint glow of a lantern smear itself across the glass and drag away, then return. The shadow of a face flattened there like a coin pressed into wax.
Water ran down the outside of the pane and made the features swim. No sound came from the child. No word came from Anna. The room waited and held its breath. The latch shivered under an unseen hand. The latch shivered under an unseen hand. Anna pressed the chair tight beneath it and felt the wood take the brace. The door gave its unsettled little sigh at the added weight, a sound she had come to know in high wind, a thing between complaint and relief. This was not mere weather testing the join. A body stood on the other side, its patience pressed through the iron as surely as rain. She lifted her hand, palm down, to the man by the shutter. "Be still." He obeyed. He flattened that same hand against the rough board and leaned with the easy balance of someone who could gather power without moving an inch. The candle made a warm cap on his brow and left his eyes, for a second, pools without color. A sleeper's breath marked the bed in soft measure. The room held. Outside, the lantern's glow swam across the glass. It was held low, as a man holds flame when he wants to see without being seen by the lane. The light made a shallow lake of yellow on the pane, then pulled away, then returned as if its bearer had second thoughts. "Who's there?" a voice called, not loud. The words hit the wood and lost their teeth. Anna kept her voice to the shape of the room. "A house with a door that is shut." "You've got company," the voice said, curious in a way that had weight. "We saw the horse." "It is a storm," she said, and heard how thin that shield was. "Open," another voice urged, closer than the first, younger by its impatience. The lantern knocked a bump against the shutter. The knock was small and ordinary. 1,000 such sounds happened between neighbors. It still made the hair at Anna's neck rise. She lowered the lampwick until flat tin and glass glowed dull, and the room's edges softened. Shadows no longer threw clear on the wall. It was something. She could not banish the candle. The child muttered when the dark pressed too close. The child slept now with the heavy coat for a weight. Meg had always slept like that, as if needing the certainty of a hand. She slid one palm along the table as if straightening cloth. Her fingers found the packet above the mantel without looking. The sprig of heather, sealed there years ago by pressure and longing, brushed her knuckle. She lifted the packet down, quick, heart thudding, moved to the table, and set it beneath the loaf where heat would loosen crumbs and make the hiding ordinary. Beeswax touched by fire spoke a ghost of sweetness into the room. The scent threaded into the storm's iron taste and made its own argument. The man by the shutter shifted. The leather at his shoulder spoke a low creak. He glanced at her hand near the bread, and something like comprehension moved along his face. He did not look long. He let his gaze return to the wood beneath his palm. "Say nothing," Anna breathed. "I will say nothing," he answered. Not even the small courtesy added to dull the edge of a command. There was no hurt in the way he took it. Meg slept on, indifferent to strangers and to men outside taking inventory of other people's lives. Anna tugged the chair another fraction tight under the latch and listened for more than sound. The more spoke in many voices. Men in weather sounded different than a storm itself. They had a way of pausing. Men paused because they expected to be answered. "You need help?" the first voice asked, almost kind now that curiosity had learned it was not alone. "We've a strap for the latch." "We have a chair," Anna said. "Plenty of men have had chairs." The lantern knocked the shutter again, as if to test the truth of that. She thought of how few things stood between women and the world when men chose to test a door. Her stomach went cold and then hot. She had made bargains with winter and with the woman at the churn. She had not made any with men who came in the night to establish stories. "Go on," the younger voice whispered, its caution false. "Look in the gap." She moved to the window with a cloth, as if it were merely her habit to wipe away condensation. She held the cloth up to the pane so that any eye outside would see only the wavering blur of fabric. The lantern's light struck the linen and made it glow milk white. The distance of a breath and a board between face and face rarely felt so thin. The man inside the room, her guest, she would call him that for now, nothing else, shifted the heel of his hand on the shutter, as if feeling for a weak point in his own resolve. Anna felt the question rise in her. Do we outweight them? Is outweighting even a choice when a whole village owns your time? He turned his head a fraction toward her, enough to ask with his face, but not with his mouth. She answered with her chin. Not a word to them. Wind took a new voice and whistled once at the eaves and died. The horse under the lean-to stomped and let out a breath. Anna caught the smell of animal and wet leather. She had known poorer nights. It did not change that she felt stripped down to her name and a single candle. Anna, the older voice tried, as if he should have that right. It's us. She knew a good half of the village by their steps and by their ways with a question. She would not give him his name or take the gift of recognition from her own mouth. Names made paths. Paths made doors easier to open. Go back, she said. My sister sleeps. So we see, the younger said, laugh folded thin into the words. Wrapped up fine. She felt the heat rise at her neck. She thought of pulling the coat off Meg so that the room would look less like a picture waiting to be interpreted. She thought of leaving it as armor against what would be said about her care. She left it. Turn the wick, she said to the man without looking. Lower it again. He did, and the room shrank to what was essential: hearth, bed, the table where hands made work into food. The candle steadied into a smaller still star. The shutter caught one more small knock like fingernails on a door. It took all her calm not to slam the palm of her hand there as if anger were a hinge. You'll make your own trouble, the older voice said, a prophecy dressed as neighborly lore. Then let me carry it, she answered. Silence fell. Not absence of men, absence of speech. Their bodies remained as surely as the wall did. She could hear, when she stopped hearing the rain, the sound of breath outside. One man breathed through his mouth and then remembered and shut it. If you need a witness, the younger murmured, sudden sly, we are a parish full of them. Anna felt the knot of the heather press against the loaf through the cloth, a small hard thing that said, stand. She let her hand stay there a heartbeat longer. Then she lifted it and smoothed the linen with a calmness that was not the same as surrender. Go, she said, and tried to make the word contain both prayer and command. Find your own roof. The lantern withdrew a handbreadth. The shadow on the pane slipped, returned, slipped again. Footsteps squelched in unison for 2 beats, then separated, as if the men looked at one another, and found no agreement at all. The pause that followed felt like the second before rain breaks or glass. Open, the younger said, louder, knocking hard with the lantern's wood shaft this time. The sound cracked in the damp. The child did not wake. The chair squealed under the latch. The door held like a stubborn heart. Anna breathed shallow and deep at once, the way one does to outlast dizziness. She set the cloth on the table and did not stare at the shutter because she would not give the men outside the courtesy of believing they held her eyes. The scent of beeswax grew by some trick of warmed air or frightened nerves. It filled her mouth like sugar and made her jaw ache. She thought of her mother's hand, elegant once and red at the knuckles by the end of it, writing careful loops and the date of a winter day when a promise had been made over the heads of people who had not been in the room to hear it. Her throat burned the way a person's skin burns when she steps too near a blaze and will not retreat. The chair jumped under the latch. The older voice hissed something she could not catch, anger aimed sideways. Anna felt the room slip half an inch toward a memory of a different night with a different knocking. She kept her presence on the present like a person pinning a tablecloth in sudden wind. Let me speak, the man by the shutter said, too low for anyone but her to hear. Only to send them away. They will know your voice, she said. I doubt it here, he answered. If I am wrong, then I will pay the debt, not you. He moved to the door and his hand met hers on the chair back for a moment. Warm, cold, human. She did not move the chair. He did not remove her hand. The exchange lived in the space of 2 breaths. He shifted a fraction to the side of the door and lifted the latch a 1/4 inch so the tongue would rattle without releasing. It was a skilled hand. He knew doors that do what they are meant to do. He let the metal sound carry. She asks for peace, he said, pitched to travel through wood, not around it. Leave us. Us. The word sat between them like a hot coal. Anna did not look at him. She had no use for owning or rejecting a word that could keep men from pushing past a hinge. Us, the younger echoed outside, delighted. Hear it? You do not want this, the man inside said, still level. If there is trouble to be had, I promise you shall have your share of it. But not here, not tonight. You promise, the older said, and the weather carried the distrust. Anna tasted iron. The man inside lowered the latch with care, as if the act had weight beyond the metal. The chair remained. The shutter felt alive under his other hand. The room's pulse climbed to match the men outside and fell, stubbornly, to match the child's sleep. He stepped back from the door and returned to the shutter and held again. The exchange with the men ended not with agreement but with the absence of more words. Absence is a kind of answer. It held as long as the men could hold their tongues, not long. Open, the younger repeated, the knock now a blow. The shutter latched. The wood took the thud and vibrated in his palm. He did not move. Anna did not move. That was the only victory they had. The lantern knocked again. The iron hook on the shutter had been stretched by years and weather, and poor nails and hands that did what men did to things that were not theirs. The blow set it off its catch. The old hook sprang. The shutter flew open so fast a current of wetter air ran into the room and curled the candle flame without killing it. Everything in the room lay for a second in lantern light, like a painting hung in a public house. The coat over the child, the man by the window holding himself like a line drawn with a straight edge. Anna standing square, her hand on the back of a chair used as a brace rather than as furniture. The men outside saw everything that could be seen in one sweep, and filled in everything else with what hours of gossip had already taught them to think. It took the time of a blink. The lantern tilted in a startled hand. Wax slopped. A low flare guttered and steadied. The younger man, close enough now that Anna could see his breath ghost across the glass, stumbled back 2 steps and banged his heel on a stone. He swore, joy and alarm jostling in the same motion. Do not drop that, the older hissed, command rising from the belly as it will in men who have long practiced obedience in others. Go, Anna said, not to them, and not to the man by the shutter and not to herself, but to the night, as if a command could be issued to entire weather. The younger man glanced toward the lane, toward the narrow track that would take him to other ears, other mouths. She saw the decision lift his heel before he had made it with his head. His body knew before his mind agreed. The lift of flight changes a posture in a way someone used to watching creatures can read. She had watched birds. Stay, the guest said to him. Voice stepped through the gap like a warning that could hold. It worked on horses. It even worked on men when they wanted to be worked on. Not now. The younger man grinned, a brief white flash with nothing to do with happiness. He turned his head, took the measure of the distance he needed to cover, and pulled the lantern hard to the side so that its light swung across the whole room again, pouring into every crack, making sure he could say later that he had seen what he had seen. Run, the older told him, resigned and complicit in the same breath. Anna stood with one hand on the chair and one hand on the table, and felt the small shift in her life as surely as a shepherd feels the first tilt of spring under ice. A person being changed cannot change while watching. She watched anyway. She saw a boy with a man's trousers and a man's hunger for being first with a tale turn his weight and carry the cottage inside his skull as clearly as if he had stolen the table and put it over his head like a roof. The man by the shutter climbed half into the opening and snatched the wood back against the frame, his knuckles rapping the sill, a bruise drawing up even before the pain could reach it. He hooked the iron with the flat of his hand and pressed until old metal thought better of coming loose again. Rain ran in over his fingers and down his wrist and into his sleeve. He held the latch with the grip of someone willing to let wood break rather than his will. "Go home," he said, quiet and terrible. "While you still can call it home." The older man left his place at the glass and stepped back into the dark, like a man who intends to make himself not a witness, but a part of the crowd later. The younger man made the choice that would be his to live with. He set the lantern at arm's length and made light into a blade to cut a way forward. He turned and ran for the village. He ran, and the dark took him. The other man lingered one breath longer, as if weight and weather could hold him steady, then slid away toward the lane with a shuffle that wanted to pass for dignity. The shutter sat under the guest's palm, vibrating with the echo of the blow that had thrown it open. Anna pushed the iron hook tight and wedged a sliver of kindling into the old hole, a small correction for years of strain. The candle steadied. The wind lost one of its voices. She did not move the chair from the door. She listened, the way a person listens for a crying child in a crowded market, separating what is theirs to answer from what is the world's noise. The horse gave a soft, disapproving snort. The rain, having done its worst, settled into a relentless wash. Somewhere across the moor a fox barked, a single strike like the snap of dry wood on a hearth. Her hands remembered tremor, and then let it go. Work has a way of knocking terror from fingers. "We must hold until morning," she said, and the word must contained everything she could not keep out. "We will," he answered. "You make a word do a great deal of labor," she said, but the sentence did not quite bite. "It is the only kind of labor men like me have learned," he said, dry as old bread. She did not give him the relief of a smile. She reached for the kettle, hung it nearer the heat, and ensured the banked coals would carry them forward. The child slept on under a borrowed coat that had become an argument in cloth. Anna's hand went to the loaf on the table and then away, hovering. The packet was not safe above the fire. It was too visible to someone who wanted to see everything. She slid it under the bread and then set the blade of her knife on top, as if she were guarding nothing more dangerous than a heel. "Sleep if you like," she said to him. "I will keep the chair and the shutter." "Sleep seems ambitious," he said. "I will watch." It was a night built for endurance and small mercies. He took turns checking the lean-to, careful to open the door a crack and close it with no bang, speaking to the horse in a tone that held steadiness like a rope. He moved as men do when they are making themselves useful for the first time in a long time. She worked at the seam on the table, eyes on the thread so she would not spend all her strength staring at wood and guessing what lay beyond it. They allowed quiet to accrue again. Quiet is a currency. You spend it reluctantly. When the wind shifted, it brought scent from the village, the bitter ghost of banked peat, boiled barley, damp wool. It told her how near morning came. She glanced at the window and saw the black begin to lose its authority. She exhaled a long-held breath she had not admitted she held. The world at the edge of dawn has the decency to be honest. Things show their shapes. Lies have to invent themselves with more effort. "They will talk," she said softly. "That does not change our night," he said. "It changes our morning," she answered. He stood by the hearth, his coat darkly steaming where rain had soaked it before it went to cover a small body. Candlelight found his ring again and made the falcon seem to lift a wing. She saw his eyes follow the movement of light to the loaf. He was too practiced not to notice what mattered in a room. He did not ask. His restraint was not a gentleman's empty courtesy. It had weight and price. "Tell me when to go," he said. "You will not go until the dark is honest enough to be seen," she said. They did not speak more. The last of the night unrolled itself like a belt, hole by hole. The rain thinned to a steady drip from the thatch. The wind forgot them and went to pull at other roofs. She pricked her finger once with her needle and watched the bead of blood swell and then disappear into the cloth. She sucked the spot and tasted iron, and it told her something she already knew. The body insists on itself when the mind is asked to carry too much. Gray came down like a lid. The outlines of the moor sharpened behind wet glass. Sheep tilted as white humps in the field beyond the lane. The lane itself cut a dark line through grass. A pair of crows took their turn at pronouncing judgment from the elder tree, and then flew off because their own business is constant. A dog barked nearer the village, and then held silence, as if corrected. The cottage shed the strangeness of being an island in blackness and returned to being a house named by shape and habit. The child woke at the grey hour when most children surface and go again. She turned under the coat and pressed her nose into the collar and made a small, complaining sound that had almost nothing to do with the night. Anna laid a hand on the coat and wished a blessing that did not require language, and then let the hand fall. The child slept again. He set the kettle off the hook before it could boil dry. He moved in the small room as if the dimensions had been drawn on his bones. He went to the door and listened without opening it. Morning has its own noises. The heavy foot of a dairy wife, the quick two-step of a boy running for a message, the wheel of a cart sticking in a rut and then going. He recognized them. He had grown up in houses where other people's morning established his day. There had been a time when he had been a boy who ran messages and thought himself important because his speed mattered. He put his hand to the latch and took it off again. "Soon," he said. "Soon," she echoed. They waited a minute more to let the world settle into itself. Then he drew the chair away from the door and unbarred the latch. He opened the door with just enough force to keep the wind's leftover mischief from flipping it out of control. Gray light ran in across the floor like water. The horse blinked and shook its mane as if to mark the beginning of a new set of tasks. The moor lay low and true. He stepped out and turned to the lean-to first, to look to the horse. He ran a hand down the animal's leg, lifting the hoof to check for a stone. He spoke to it without speaking, communicating a man's intention with touch. He loosened the girth so the horse could breathe. He took the bridle off, let the animal drink. He did these things with the assurance of someone who has had animals trust him, despite the ring on his hand. Two figures came up the lane and stopped at the sight of him. Neighbors. He did not know them, but he knew what they were. A pair who moved as if accustomed to carrying messages back and forth like small sacks, not heavy, but enough to change how a day sits in a house. The woman adjusted her shawl with a rattle as if cold had changed the fabric even if weather had not. The man let his eyes pass from the horse to the door, to the coat glimpsed at the edge of the bed. He did not look long. Looking long would be either rudeness or courage, and he had neither. "Morning," the man said, but the word was only shaped like greeting. "Morning," the guest returned, exactly as shaped, no more. "You're far," the woman said, not asking. "The storm made fools of distances," he said. They looked at his boots, at his hands, at the horse's tack. They looked at nothing at all. Then, as if the invisible string that had pulled them to the cottage had played out its length, they turned and went, heads inclined toward one another. The measure of their steps changed as they reached the first bend, the difference between walking and carrying news. Anna stood just inside the door. She had not crossed the sill. The angle of her shoulders told him that a step beyond the threshold would be a step into something she could not return from unchanged, and she allowed him that work instead. He nodded once and closed the door gently, not because he feared the wind now, but because the house deserved it. "They have written the story," he said. "They always do," she answered. He went to the table. He rested his palm on the loaf and felt the heat. His hand moved to the packet beneath, slow, as if the bread itself were bruised, and he did not mean to hurt it. He did not lift it. He took his hand away. "What will be done," he said, "if they come with more than words?" "We will lock the door," she said, "and if a lock is nothing, we will hold the chair." And if a chair is nothing? We will stand, she said, and that was the end of that. He went to his coat on the peg and drew from the inner pocket a small leather purse. He set it on the table, not a loud sound, but waited. He did not look at her when he did it. A man can hold his face steady while his hand attempts something it knows might fail. For the rent, they will threaten, he said. For bread. For the child. The child stirred and did not wake. Anna's eyes went to the purse and then to his face, and then to the cut on his temple and back to the purse. It was not coin alone that lay there. It was apology, and bought silence, and the attempt to mend a thing with the wrong tools. We eat, she said, and the word contained the whole of human pride because it contained survival. We do not sell our names. It is not a price, he said. It always is, she answered, and for a moment the room went so still and clear he felt he could hear the word coin fall with a tiny ring on every table in the village. She set her hand on the purse as if to accept it, and then pushed it back toward him with a movement that made no show. She did not shove. She returned. The difference was a kind of music. He did not move to take it back. He left it where it lay, between them like a thing both acknowledged and refused. Your cut has bled again, she said, as if to put their talk back into a place where care might do some work. He reached up without looking and touched the spot. His fingers came away clean. It looks worse than it is. That is the way of such things, she said. He reached for the loaf and lifted it. The packet lay honest beneath, bound in linen string, wax pressed with the falcon, heather trapped under the knot. He glanced at her, a question. She nodded, a reply. He set the bread aside and lifted the packet, sensitive to the age of it. He eased the string with a nail rather than break it. When he set the seal to the flame for a breath to soften the wax, the beeswax scent rose with authority, a gentle smell with a past full of teeth. This is yours, she said, and also not. He understood. He opened the packet to the first folded page. It was a letter. Her mother's hand, laboring but clear, date carefully set at the top, as if numbers could make a promise obeyed. It spoke of rents and rights, and a conversation with a lady at the hall years ago, when such matters were first threatened by a change of hands. It named the steward as a man who had come with such papers in his bag and had left with promises in his ears and calculations in his ledger that had not matched kindness. He turned the page and found another sheet. Older, the paper finer, the hand a precise, lovely script he knew in the way a body knows a voice in a dark room. His mother's hand. The memorandum was short, noting certain tendencies held in safety against mischance or ambition unless reviewed with her. It listed deed numbers in neat columns with dates and a small mark he remembered. A star made with an unusually sharp nib. It had been signed with a name that belonged to the house the falcon guarded. The ink had gone from black to brown, but the authority remained. The steward ignored this, Anna said, not letting anger own the sentence. She fed it fact and let it live. Or, he said, he cleared a path around it. Her mouth pressed a fraction tighter. It is why I would not take your purse. I understand, he said. And he did, at least in the first degree. He looked at the lower corner of the page where the witness mark lay. There, in smaller, more cramped script, was a notation he recognized as much for its habit as its hand. The late Duke's habit of writing a date in the format he alone preferred. Day raised and month underlined like a footnote to his own authority. It was an old irritation of a son's that rose like a ghost and then dropped away with a weight that was not irritation at all. He did not let that rush surface. He kept his mind's face clear. What must be done, he said, and knew as he said it that the answer would cost more than coin. Truth must be read where they cannot call it gossip, she said, in a room where it cannot be said to be the talk of women. He winced inwardly. She had named the thinness of his title. It was a weapon or a shield, depending on who held it and who bled under it. They will come first, he said, to take the letter before it grows legs. They will, she said simply. They will call it a thing that belongs to them because it says their names. He set his palm flat on the paper, not to claim it, but to steady it against the breath that shook it. I will go to the hall, he said, and this time the word will had weight sufficient to move wood. I will take out the memorandum from where it is kept. I will bring it. We will make the reading in a place where they cannot say it is only us. The vicar will not play the steward's drum if the paper is set before his eyes. You will leave, she said, and made it sound like the breaking of something and like a blessing for a man on a necessary road. I will leave, he said, and return. She did not say, be quick. The words were unreasonable to place on a man who had to become large enough in public to confront a house built on his own name. She wrapped the packet again in linen. He watched her tie the knot with care that made it a small ceremony. He knew better than to put his hands in it. He stayed in his place and let the room make note of what had been done. A sound came from the lane. Other steps, other voices. Not the cowardly press of a night curiosity, the squared tread of purpose. Men who walked carrying other men's authority have a sound. They will ask for it, she said. They will not have it, he answered. Knuckles struck the door. Not a polite knock, but not a ram. The kind of insistence a man uses when he expects to be obeyed. Another voice, lower, trained to be heard across yards. By order of the steward. Anna set the packet on the hearth while her face stayed smooth. She lifted one brick at the back. The one she knew from childhood came loose in her hands. Ash dusted her knuckles. She slid the linen package into the cavity and replaced the brick with a twist to settle it white to white. She laid the loaf back on the table, as if it had never moved. Open, the voice repeated, sharper, because patience was not in the sack today. He went to the door and did not step aside. He laid his palm on the latch, but did not lift. State your business. It's in my first call, the man answered. By order of the steward. There's talk that a paper's been stole from the hall. This is a private house, he said. You do not enter a private house on talk. We enter where authority says, the man returned, not troubling to make the next argument. Anna stood where she could see the hearth and the bed and the door all at once. Her hand lay on the table as if to pick up the knife and cut bread. Her other hand hung loose at her side, relaxed as if she were after all just a woman in her kitchen. She was a woman in her kitchen. That was the point. You may fetch your master, the guest said, and the word master was a clean insult placed on the table between men who knew better. And your master may fetch his paper if he has one. You do not cross this threshold. The man outside tried to peer through the crack that was not there. You speak bold for someone who hides. Who hides? Anna said. Behind a door he has not opened. The pause that followed went brittle. He could feel it through the wood as if a cold edge had been slid into a seam. He raised his voice not at all and achieved more because of it. Go, he said. You are not wanted here. The men muttered. Boots scuffed. The door took a small kick, the way a boy kicks a log to see if it will roll. It did not. The men retreated, not far, and the sound of them thinned into the lane. He didn't like it. Withdrawal without giving ground is a ruse. I must go now, he said. Go, she said, and gave back to him the word he had just given to the men outside. He took his coat from the bed, careful not to wake the child, and moved in the small space with the force of a man made suddenly too large. He set the purse back in his pocket because leaving it seemed a different kind of insult. He opened the door, and cool morning air laid a damp hand on his face. He stepped into it and turned back once, a reflex. She stood at the table with her head high. He thought of what silence asks of people. He shut the door with a sure hand and set the latch as if that small act could hold off what wanted in. He went to the lean-to, to his horse. He tightened the girth. He put his hand to the animal's neck and felt warm life under wet hair. He swung up. He was the kind of rider who made a horse look smaller in no way at all. He set his knees and spoke low. The horse moved down the lane, hooves sending up little spatters that landed like punctuation on the morning's sentence. She counted breaths until the hoofbeats were only a memory her ear insisted on making. She had time to set the kettle back on, to lay the knife beside the loaf, with the blade turned inward, because she had raised a child to no care, to sweep a stray curl of thread from the hearth so it would not burn and smell like scorched cotton. She had time to check the loose brick with her knuckle, to feel how heat makes stone swell and fit, to say to herself without saying it, if they search, they will not think to look in a place honest women keep clean. The pause was not long enough to be counted as safety. Boots came again, more of them. The weight of the step told its truth to the floorboard before the door owned the knowledge. The men did not try courtesy. They knocked because knocking satisfies a line of a rule, and then they put their shoulders to the wood. The latch bit. The chair skidded and squealed. The door took a blow that lifted rust from its hinges in a brown powder you could have tasted if you were close enough. "By order of the steward," a different voice barked. The words were bigger and emptier. "Open or we'll open it for you." "Wait for the master," she said, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough not to sound like begging. "You have no warrant." "Warrant's in my fist," the man said. She did not reply. Reply would be a thread they could take hold of like thieves taking a sleeve. She put her hand on the chair back the way you lay a hand on a horse about to shy, to communicate without words that you have a will and it is calm, and it is not going anywhere. The first blow made the latch groan. The second sent a rain of splinters from the inside of the jamb. The child woke with a wordless cry, clutching the coat to her and sitting up fast, hair wild. Anna did not turn, because the worst thing a body can do to a frightened creature is to let fear see its mirror in your face. "Stay," she said, and the child, who knew that voice, stilled by inches. A third blow. A crack ran along the panel, following a line of softer grain laid down the year the tree had to pull water deeper. The chair jumped under the latch. The bolt screamed a little, iron against wood, asking for a grace that was not coming. "Stand back!" a man shouted on the other side of the door, not to her but to his own, bracing himself into a story he would tell later with his hands. She did not yield her place. Heat from the hearth reached her back. She watched the brick. She did not let her eyes make a target of it. She breathed. Calm is not the same as surrender. Calm is the stance that lets a person move when she must. The next blow found a seam the others had opened. The latch tore free and the door splintered under the next strike. The door gave way on a seam that had remembered every winter. The bar kicked at the chair and sent it skidding. Shards jumped like startled birds. Two men drove their shoulders through the gap they had made and bulled into the room with the confidence of hands who believed the house belonged to them because they could force the hinge. Mud slid from their boots and made a brown blossom on the floorboards. Anna did not step back. She took one pace to the side so Meg could see her if the child looked up. The poker leaned by the hearth. She did not grasp it as a weapon. She laid her hand on it, as on a shepherd's crook, to steady her own body. Her palm was blackened. Ash took the sweat from her skin and made courage feel like a physical thing. "By order of the steward," the taller said, chest heaving in excited triumph. "There's talk of a paper that belongs at the hall." "This is my house," Anna said. "You have no order that opens my door." The shorter of the two took a stride toward the hearth with a ferret's quickness and sniffed the air as if he could smell beeswax through clay. He put his hand to the mantel. His fingers came away with a film of old polish. He turned toward the bed and saw the coat draped over a child's small body. His mouth made a shape that might have been a smile if it had contained any kindness. "Busy night," he said. Meg sat up hard at the sound of men's voices and held tight to the coat like a raft in a sudden river. Her eyes were wide and unfocused with waking fear. Anna slid her hand along the poker until her thumb found the little nick near the handle, the place where it had always snagged. It gave her a point to hold. "Out," she said, and was surprised by the steadiness of it. "You may wait on the lane if you like. You do not come in uninvited. That is the rule for strangers and for rats." The tall man laughed at the neatness of the insult, and then remembered that laughter would make him less dangerous. He put his jaw back into the position that says, authority. We've an obligation to bring any document with the Falcon seal to the steward. You'll be sensible and hand it over. Fetch your master, Anna said. If he is brave enough to look my door in the face, he may knock for himself. The shorter one reached for the hearthbrick. Leave that, she said, and the word came sharp as a hand smack. You'll bring dust down on the child. He jerked his hand back despite himself, the way a boy does when a tone triggers an old obedience. The tall one made a show of checking the windows, as if the small house had places to hide men and horses. His glance slid over the table, the loaf, the knife laid with its blade turned inward, the humble arrangement that could not be made to look wicked, even with a lantern swung at its worst angle. Meg found voice at last. Anna. I am here, Anna said. No one will touch you. The short man's eyes flicked to the bed and then to Anna, taking a measure he should not. She'll be touching nothing but gossip by noon, he said to his companion, pitched just too loud for inside. Anna felt the heat of fury hit her face and then drain, leaving a cooler strength. She did not shift her stand. She watched their hands, not their mouths. Men who talk like that want your attention in one place while their fingers do business in another. Out, she said again, or you will test a fire that won't be yours to put out. The tall one set his palm flat on the table and leaned into his importance. You've a tongue that'll see you turned out without needing any help from me. His gaze fell to the purse on Gabriel's last place at the table. The coin returned and refused. He tapped it with a finger as if testing whether it would jump. And here's a gentleman who knows what you are. Take your hand off what you cannot read, Anna said, and then the room changed. Hoofbeats came up the lane in a rapid, controlled thunder that had nothing to do with rain. A woman's voice cried a warning that was not frightened but outraged. God's mercy, mind your boots in that house. The tall man turned, so confident a moment earlier, and then lost that confidence the way a candle loses authority in full daylight. Gabriel took the threshold in one stride and filled the gap the men had made with his body. He had not had time to dry fully, water still threaded from his collar into the line of his neckcloth. His breath came hard from the ride and held no apology. Behind him stood Mrs. Talbot, with her shawl pinned like armor, and two stablemen who were not men of the steward's choosing. They were men of the estate, whose loyalty had been trained by daily bread and habit, and a certain housekeeper's eye. You will leave this cottage at once, Gabriel said, voice ironed flat by a will that did not need height to make itself tall. You have no authority to enter without warrant. By order of, the tall man began. Of me, Mrs. Talbot said, stepping past Gabriel so that her gray gaze landed on the men like shot. And of this house's mistress, she added, chin toward Anna, not as a concession, but as an instruction to the men about where authority resides in a room. Out, and mind your mud. The shorter of the intruders tried bluster and found it slipping on this floor. We were told there was a paper stolen. If there is a paper missing from the hall, I will say so, Mrs. Talbot cut in, and it will not be found under a cottage brick a quarter-mile from where it belongs. Out. Now. The stablemen took a step forward as one. Their hands did not go to fists. They went to the men's upper arms with the quiet suggestion of men accustomed to moving obstinate livestock without undue fuss. The intruders resisted, then yielded, then pretended they had meant to yield all along. They backed into the yard, too aware of the household's eyes upon them. The door swung shut under Mrs. Talbot's firm hand, and the chair was set back under the latch. It would not hold against a ram, but it would hold in this moment, because the room had taken back its right to say who enters. Meg exhaled a jagged breath and choked on a sob she had swallowed too fast. Anna went to the bed and lifted the coat an inch to make space for air and calm. She smoothed Meg's hair and kissed her forehead. The old gestures worked the way old tools do, not because they are elegant, but because they fit the hand. Gabriel stood one pace into the room and scanned it as if it were a battlefield whose lines could be altered by arranging furniture. The heat on his face could have been from the ride or from anger or both. He made himself breathe as if he had all the air in the world, and only then looked at Anna. "Forgive me," he said, and did not mean for the words to be a shield against guilt. He meant them as acknowledgement of a cost already paid. "You came," she said. "I wish I had not had to return," he answered. "Mrs. Talbot fetched men with quicker legs than mine." "I told him to bring them," Mrs. Talbot said briskly, pinning her shawl again more tightly. "And I told the steward's lads just now that they would not like what would be waiting for them at the hall if I found as much as one footprint where it ought not to be in this cottage. Tea," she added, as if it were part of military doctrine. "We'll take some before anyone tries to be clever again." Her gaze went to the hearth as if to measure heat available for necessities. Her eye slipped near the loose brick and made no sign that it had seen anything amiss. Gabriel stepped toward the fire and knelt in the small space between table and hearth, the way a boy kneels to blow on embers without scorching his hair. He looked at the brick and the smear of fresh ash around it. He felt the smallest rise of its corner under his knuckle. He set his hand against it, as if steadying a thing that might otherwise tip, and pressed it home. He did not lift it. He chose not to ask. Anna saw him make that choice. Her chest loosened in one hard ache. "Go to the hall," Gabriel said to Mrs. Talbot, rising. "Take the key to the North Records room from the hook above the scullery door. Bring the memoranda she and I spoke of, and the rent roll for the last 5 years." Mrs. Talbot nodded once. "And if the steward says the door is not to be opened?" "You will open it," he said. "And if he objects, you will remind him that his authority is to keep my books for me, not to hide them from me." "Quite," she said, the small word carrying a world of satisfaction. She turned to the stableman. "You too, with me. We will have paper before noon if we have to pull the shelves down to find it." They left at once, their departure making a clean hole in the room that let quiet come back in. The cottage felt both larger and more exposed. Morning light skated across the floorboards where rain had made them shine. The door wore its wound openly. The chair held the latch in place like an old friend doing its best. Gabriel took a breath and let it out slowly. For the first time since entering, he let his attention rest fully on Anna. He saw the lines of strain at her mouth, the way her hands, when they had nothing to hold, made fists, and then unmade them. He measured the space between them and did not cross it. He did not intend to mistake gratitude for invitation. "I am well," she said, unhelpfully, because it was what a person says when her whole house has been turned into a threshold. "Meg is shaken." "I was a fool to leave you with that door," he said. "You were not," she answered. "You went to fetch what we need." "We," he repeated, tasting the word as if it might scorch his tongue. She lifted the kettle and set it aside so the coals could be pulled forward. Her movements were neat, the economy of a woman who has counted pennies in breath. "We," she said again, "if you do not mind sharing a word." He almost laughed because the only thing he wanted to share just then was the temper that had been trained out of him by a house that required its men to be colder than their grief. He set his hand on the table with care, as if the boards might bruise. "I have sent Mrs. Talbot for the late Duchess's papers," he said, "and the rent roll. I will send a man to the vicar. Reverend Pierce knows the difference between a parish matter and an estate matter. He also knows when both are one and the same. We will make a reading in the village hall." Anna did not flinch at the word hall. It is where people are made to stand and be made an example of. She wore it like another winter. "He will come?" she asked of the vicar. "He will," Gabriel said. "And if a magistrate can be found, he will be asked to attend. If not, the parish book will bear the weight until the law can take it from us." "We will not wait long," Anna said. "The waiting is where men like the steward do their work." He nodded. "I have no appetite for delay." He went to the door again, opened it a crack, looked down the lane. The steward's men had gone. A woman from 2 doors over stood at her fence with a basket of kindling balanced on her hip, pretending that the angle of her head did not give away where her attention lay. He closed the door and set the latch again, then turned the chair a fraction to give it more bite. He wanted to say something about safety. He knew better. He offered, instead, a plan. "One of the stablemen will go to the church now," he said, "and ask Reverend Pierce to open the hall as soon as he is able. I will remain until Mrs. Talbot returns with the documents, and then we will go together." "We will go together," Anna said, the echo a kind of courage. A fragile humor offered itself, and did them both good. Gabriel gestured at the ruined door. "And this?" "It has earned its rest," she said. "We will mend it after the hall, if we are allowed to come home to it." "We will be," he said, and the "we" there felt less like an argument against the world, more like a statement of intent placed on a ledger line. Meg slid from the bed, feet seeking the warm patch of rug by the hearth. She watched the adults with those direct eyes children carry until we train them to look aside. "I'm hungry," she said, apology hidden under courage. "Then we eat," Anna said. She cut bread with the knife turned outward now. She spread a bit of honey and pinched salt atop it the way she had learned once from a woman who showed her that poor food can be made brave if one has a pinch to spare. Meg took the slice with both hands, gratitude parsimonious as hunger. Gabriel stood back and let the sight stitch up a small rent in him. "You have not eaten," Anna said to him without looking. She could not allow herself that softness without shoring it up with a task. She cut another slice and held it out. He took it with a caution he reserved for debt. He ate standing at the hearth, warming the bread in his hands, as if to keep from robbing them of something they could claim for themselves. "Why did you come back?" Meg asked, direct, eyes on the tall man's face. "Because I had not finished what I began," he said. "And because they were unkind," Meg said, lowering her voice as if the men might step out of the kettle. "Yes," he said, and left it there. Mrs. Talbot returned sooner than any of them deserved. The door opened under her precise hand, and she came in with a flat bundle secured with green ribbon and tied again inside a shawl against the wet. One stableman followed, carrying a leather-bound ledger with both arms, as if it contained more than sums. The other went off without being told to the church, as if he had heard the plan through the door as easily as through a mouth. "Found where it had been put," Mrs. Talbot said with satisfaction, sharp enough to cut twine. "Someone had placed a later copy in front and left this behind where no one lazy would look. I am many things. I am not lazy." She set the bundle on the table, untied it, and showed the neat columns in a hand Anna had seen once and Gabriel had grown up knowing. The document, when opened, made the room suddenly larger, as if paper could push walls back. Gabriel bent over it, and his breath left him in a controlled line. "There it is," he said, "and there, and here." He tapped the deed numbers with a finger that did not truly touch. He glanced toward the hearth and felt the remembered bee-sweet of old wax. "We will take these to the hall." Mrs. Talbot's gaze swept the room and returned to Anna, landing with the weight of respect. "You will come," she said, making it a sentence rather than a question, as if she could bully the world into recognizing that this woman had rights in the room where rights were written down. Anna nodded. "I will come." Gabriel looked at her and allowed that the word "we" had lengthened and thickened since he had spoken it last. He did not name what that meant. He went to the peg and took his coat and shook it out. He moved to the ruined door and examined the breakage, then set the chair in a different orientation so that the latch would sit more securely. He could not repair the world. He could make this one hinge hold until they returned. "Before we go," he said. He turned to Anna, and for a second his guarded manner dropped like the breath before a plunge. "I will ask you to be at the vicarage while I fetch the steward to the hall." "I will not hide," she said. "I ask for your safety," he said. "You have the paper," she said. "What I am is part of it." He shut his mouth on argument. She was right. It would be a different reading if the woman named in the paper stood beside him, neither bowed nor bought. He inclined his head, a small bow that acknowledged a sovereign where none had been thought to stand. "We will go now," he said. He lifted the packet from where he had pushed the hearth brick tight and gave it back to Anna's hands. She wrapped it again in her cloth with the care women keep for bread. She laid the heather sprig in the fold, as if to remind the room that promises can smell sweet, even when they have been forced to live above smoke. She tucked the bundle into a basket and covered it with a length of plain work, a dress half-hemmed that had paid for oats and lamp oil and would now carry a different debt. Mrs. Talbot took up the rent roll and the memorandum, her mouth set in the line that made servants stand straighter as she passed. The stableman who had gone to the church returned and nodded once. The hall would be opened. The road between cottage and hall was short and long at once. Gabriel turned to the child. "Meg," he said, and waited until she looked up. "You will walk at my left." Meg considered this like a queen, and then nodded. She slid off the bed and set her small feet square. Anna took the basket up. She looked once at the brick, once at the table where refused coin had sat, once at the coat that had kept a child warm when words could not. Then she lifted her chin. They stepped out together into the damp, clean air, the cottage door drawn to and latched behind them as best it would. The lane held footprints and the last shine of rain, and the village waited with its doors cracked and its eyes full. The moor smelled of wet heather and something like iron, the scent of blood and change. Gabriel offered his arm without insisting. Anna did not take it and did not refuse it. They walked side by side, their steps matched, toward the hall where words would have to do the work that force had failed to finish. The lane delivered them to the village hall with the steady inevitability of rain running to a low place. Gabriel felt the shift in the crowd before he saw faces. A hush that was not courtesy, but calculation. Doors stood ajar, boots scuffed, shawls tilted. The hall's planked floor had been swept in a hurry and remembered other meetings by the shine where feet had argued before. Reverend Pierce waited near the front table with the parish register open and a sand shaker ready. He lifted his chin in greeting and in warning both. The vicar's gaze took the measure of paper in Mrs. Talbot's hands and the basket at Anna's arm, and then moved to Gabriel, as if to say, "The room is yours if you will carry it." Gabriel placed the late Duchess's memorandum on the table. He set the rent roll beside it. He laid one hand on each, as if to keep the drift of rumor from lifting them. He had argued in rooms with more gilding and fewer eyes. He had never felt the weight of a name like this. "We will be brief," he said, and the word we traveled to the corners and returned heavier. "There is talk of a paper. Let us replace talk with reading." He did not take a chair. He remained standing where every gaze could be met without a tilt of head. He looked to Reverend Pierce. The vicar nodded, opened the register, and dipped his pen. The scrape of nib on paper was an anchor. Faces lined the benches. Men Gabriel knew by trade and by the way their hats had shaped their hair. Women he knew by the tilt of their baskets, by the careful knot at a kerchief's corner. At the back, boys' eyes shone with the thrill of being where they'd been told not to come. Each breath was a separate judgment. He readied himself to be measured by them all. He felt Anna take her place to his right, a distance of a handspan. The space between a man and a woman who had chosen to be seen beside each other and had accepted the cost. Anna held her basket with both hands and let it be the thing that stood between her and the room. The heather pressed under the cloth perfumed her fingertips. Beeswax ghosted the air near the table where the memorandum lay. She knew half the eyes in the hall by name and the other half by caution. The vicar's wife, not present, would ask later how the light had fallen. She wanted to say, evenly, and also not at all. She scanned the crowd for the steward and found Mr. Carrow near the far door, late and composed. He entered with two men who always walked a step behind him, as if they had once been footmen and had not been able to stop. He carried a ledger under one arm and a face like damp cloth, the kind that takes impressions easily and forgets how it looked before. He saw her and did not look away. His eyes slid to Gabriel, then to the documents. She watched the calculation in him gather and decided she could forgive him nothing. Reverend Pierce cleared his throat and let the sound settle. "We are met to hear the reading of a memorandum of the late Duchess," he said, "and to align our records." Mrs. Talbot set the bundle she had tied with green ribbon on the table and untied it with a neat tug. She laid the memorandum open. Its columns looked harmless and had teeth. She stood back but did not relinquish her long habit of guarding household truth. She placed a finger at the first line without touching. Gabriel looked at the room. "Lady Emmeline Hawthorne wrote this in the year named here," he said, the date carrying more than ink for him. "She listed tenancies protected from seizure without her review. She signed it with her name. The rent roll kept at the hall contains entries that contradict it." He read the first deed number, then the second. He read the names associated, voices catching in throats as people recognized their own lines on paper. The hall leaned forward in increments. He moved down the list with the even tone of a man who would not let his voice do theatrics that the facts did well enough. Caro reached the table at last and set his ledger down with a practiced thump. "Your Grace," he said with careful respect, that meant the opposite. "Those are not the current books." "We are looking at the book that binds you," Gabriel said, "and me." "It is my duty to manage, not to be managed," Caro answered, dry as ash. "The late Duchess's kindness was never meant to outlive necessity." Mrs. Talbot's breath drew in sharp. "It was meant to outlive men who would profit by forgetting it." Reverend Pierce lifted a hand. "We will have reading," he said. "Then we will have answers." Gabriel turned the page and traced columns with his gaze. He put a finger on the small mark at the margin, a star made with that particular nib his mother had favored, and something in his body settled, as if a long-pressed spring had been given release in the right direction. He read again. He read until the corner of the room where Caro's two men stood no longer smirked. He looked to Mrs. Talbot. "Tell the hall where this book was found." "In the North Records room," she said. 3 shelves in, under a later copy that had been pushed forward to take its place to the eye. This older one had dust not of age but of a careless remover. Men who do not climb stools forget what those who keep their houses do. A low ripple went through the room, the kind villagers make when something is set straight without drama. Caro moved his hand on the ledger as if it wanted to get away from him. "We have arrears," he said. "We have tenants who pretend piety and hide coin." "You have lists," Gabriel interrupted, voice like a door shut in wind. "We have names. And we have a memorandum that forbids your taking without review. You will answer for entries that contradict it." He looked to the vicar. "Reverend Pierce, please mark that the notice of revocation at Miss Fletcher's cottage is rescinded in the ledger and in the parish book." The vicar wrote with a scratch that comforted Anna like a cat purring on a far chair. Ink dried under sand. The line appeared before her like a door. Caro's gaze went to Anna because men like him prefer to fight battles where they feel taller. "You had a man in your house," he said to her, loud enough to reach the hard ears at the back. Anna did not raise her voice. "I had shelter in my house," she said. "He had a storm at his back." Mrs. Talbot spoke before anyone else could. "Miss Fletcher's door opened to charity for a man caught by weather. When I arrived, the gentleman stood by the fire. The child slept under his coat. The room was decent. That is what I saw." Her testimony fell like a bucket of clean water. It washed the floor and left corners unashamed. Gabriel did not flinch from Caro's move. He put his hand on his signet and knew what it meant. He reached for the small stick of wax the vicar kept nearby for seals, and warmed it over the candle until it softened to malleable honesty. He tipped it to the lower corner of his mother's memorandum, below her name where space remained like an invitation written to him long ago. "Your Grace," Reverend Pierce said softly, not warning, but witness. Gabriel pressed his signet into the warm wax. He held it there long enough to feel the impression take. When he lifted his hand, the falcon stood beside its twin. 2 wings, one name with another. He did not perform. He let the room take the act and make of it what it would. "I affirm the binding force of my mother's protection," he said. "I affirm it upon my office. and I declare restitution for those whose rents were taken beyond what is just under this memorandum." Caro's composure collapsed in tiny ways that only practiced eyes could love. The corner of his mouth slipped, a finger tapped, then stopped tapping. He reached for offense and found none that would hold. "You will ruin us with your sentiment," he said. "I will mend what you have cut," Gabriel answered. "You are suspended from your duties pending full account. Mrs. Talbot will keep the keys to the records room. The vicar will oversee repayments from estate funds until a temporary steward is named." The hall did not cheer. It breathed. The kind of release that makes hips ache and hearts feel lighter. Anna felt her knees wish for a chair and refused them. She stood in the full beam of consequence with her basket in her hands and watched the room change around a table. She had seen men attempt to force change at doors with their shoulders and fail. She had not expected change to be written by a hand steady enough to keep the ink from blotting. Caro tried one last line. He turned with a pivot learned from years of smaller rooms. He raised his chin to address the back benches where judgments are loudest and least brave. "Ask what she did in the night," he said. Mrs. Talbot did not give the back benches a chance to take his cue. "She kept her girl warm," she said. "She kept a gentleman in his place by putting him on a stool rather than a bed. She fed him bread. She cleaned a small cut with vinegar. She kept a latch with a chair because two men came where they should not. That is what she did in the night." Reverend Pierce set his pen down. "We will keep to the matter," he said, gentle as a father who knows which corner to stand in so the children will stop fighting. He looked at Anna and then at Gabriel. "Is there more to be read?" "Only the parts that require work rather than ink," Gabriel said. He looked at the room again. "Restitutions will begin with those named in this column, Miss Fletcher among them. Apprenticeship placements for parish children will be arranged, beginning with Meg Fletcher, under the vicar's oversight and Mrs. Talbot's counsel, until such time as order is restored." He had said her sister's name aloud. The sound put a stitch in Anna's chest and then eased it. She watched Meg straighten like a small boat riding after a wave, head up, determination finding a place to sit. Meg's hand went to her dress where the hem hung. The instinct to work when overwhelmed was a family habit. Gabriel turned to Anna. The room had not moved. He did not ask it to give them privacy. Love is not a small room. It is courage in a public one. "I have trespassed on your house. Then I have trespassed on your mourning," he said. "I would not trespass on your life. Your tenancy is restored in perpetuity under the memorandum. Your sister's place will be made under the parish with my support. And if you wish it, I ask to court you under rules that are not of my making only." The room shifted as bodies made space for hearts they were not accustomed to carrying. People who had come for scandal found themselves present at a different sort of reading. Anna looked at him and saw not a ring or a title, but a man holding himself in the right shape for this request, square, steady, without flourish. The heat at her throat rose, not from shame but from recognition. She lifted her basket and set it on the table. She untied the cloth and took the heather sprig into her fingertips. It had been pressed long ago, but it still smelled like moor and stubbornness. She did not make a speech. She placed the sprig in his open palm. "Keep this with the other promises," she said, "and we will see if the weather in our two houses can be made the same." His hand closed, not to capture, but to shelter. Emotion moved across his face, as if a lantern had passed. Quick, honest, unable to be hidden by training. He bowed his head. "Not much. Enough." Reverend Pierce began to write again. The pen made a sound like a kettle just before it boils. Mrs. Talbot, uncharacteristically, cleared her throat and looked as if she were remembering a room 30 years ago, where she had made a smaller promise to a different table. Caro stood fixed for a last second, like a man deciding whether to be a villain in defeat or merely a small man whose time had come. Then he stepped back, stripping himself of the center he had borrowed for years. The formal part went forward with the dull rhythms that make lives livable. Names were called, lines were noted, The vicar's sand dried the ink that would protect bread for months to come. Gabriel handed out not coin but written commitments. He let others witness him do it. It was not drama. It was a new habit laid down in the presence of those it would serve. When the press eased, the hall did not empty. It loosened into knots of talk. Women corrected men's versions before men could carry them home. Boys whispered and failed to be quiet about it. A few came to Anna, touching her sleeve with the polite bravery of those who want to be near the center while insisting they are only passing by. Mrs. Talbot tugged at her shawl. "We will go now," she said, and the wee held enough iron to make the road safe. "The house wants closing, and the door wants mending." Gabriel looked to Reverend Pierce. "You will keep the registers," he said. "I will keep them," the vicar answered, "and I will keep the men who think they know better near enough to be taught." Gabriel offered his arm in the sight of everyone. Anna laid her hand there, light as a promise, not as a possession. Meg took his other side, uninvited and unquestioned. The three of them stepped into the lane, Mrs. Talbot following with the memoranda secured, the rent roll cradled, as if paper could be warmed against a person and taught where to belong. The walk to the cottage was quieter than the walk away had been. Gossip has less work to do after truth has taken its place. The moor smoked under late sun, as if two contradictory weathers had been asked to share a field. The elder tree shook water from its leaves and returned to being only a tree. At the cottage, the door looked weary and a little proud. Mrs. Talbot clicked her tongue at the broken place and sent one of the hall's men for a plank and a new latch. While they waited, she commanded tasks with the pleasure of someone who has not often been permitted to do so in public. "Move that chair. Sweep those splinters to the side. Set the poker where a child can't catch it with her skirts. You, your grace, hold this wood while I set the nails." Gabriel held wood. He did it well. The sound of hammer and nail made a rhythm that felt like a decent end to a day spent on words. Meg fetched small things proudly and took instruction with the seriousness of a clerk before a great book. Anna watched, the flint in her heart softening into something she did not yet name for fear of scaring it away. The latch went in true, the door shut clean. Mrs. Talbot tested it twice, then patted the plank the way one pats a good horse. "There," she said, and stood back. Gabriel stepped into the cottage and knew it differently now. It was still one room, still small, still containing bread, kettle, cloth, and a bed made of everything but indulgence. Yet the air had changed. The storm had left other weather behind it, the kind people make for one another. He looked at the hearth. He looked at the mantel. He looked at Anna. "May I?" he asked. She nodded. He took the memorandum that belonged at the hall and did not touch it. He allowed Mrs. Talbot to tuck it into her bag where it would be returned. But he lifted the folded packet that had lived here and laid it back on the mantel where it had rested before, the heather's stem aligned with the wood's grain. He laid his signet hand briefly over it, and then took it away. "Keep it there," he said, "not as a weapon, as a marriage between paper and bread." Anna's breath caught, not at the word marriage, at the way he had placed paper and bread in the same sentence. Meg crawled onto the bed and tested the new latch with her ear, listening to the click, and then smiling as if a music box had been wound. She curled under the coat, not because she feared, but because habit had learned to seek that weight. "It smells like you," she said, unembarrassed. "It smells like rain and horse," Gabriel said. "And bees," Meg added, because the packet was warm again, and the room had learned the scent of its own promise. Anna went to the table. She poured water into the kettle and set it on. She moved with deliberation, letting ordinary actions read like a prayer answered. Gabriel crossed the small space between table and hearth and stopped one pace from her. He waited. He had decided long ago to learn a new kind of patience. He would practice it here. "Tell me," she said, "what your mother would say of today." He let himself smile a little, as if at a private remembrance. She would say that a house cannot be kept by pride alone. It must be kept by small promises recorded and honored. She would say that there is no better way to make a name than to keep one quietly. And of me, that you are the kind of woman she made those stars in the margin for, he said, even if she did not yet know your name. Silence opened then, not a gap, but a field. The kettle began to whisper. The new latch clicked, settled into its new nature. Outside, the Moor remembered sun. I will not have you ashamed, he said. The words came out low, and the raw edge of them was not from fear. Not of me, not ever. If you feel shame because of me, I have failed. She raised her gaze without flinching. I will not be bought. Then buy me, he said. And if he had been a different man, that would have been a trick. Here, it was truth. With your yes or with your no, I will hold either if it is yours. She reached for the heather sprig where he had laid it in the fold of the mantle. It was small and rough and brave. She held it in both hands the way one holds a spoon at a sickbed. She stepped close enough that he could count the darker threads woven through her hair. Yes, she said, on terms that will sometimes cost us. He exhaled, then laughed quietly, as a man laughs who has been granted a mercy he nearly dared not ask for. He raised a hand and stopped a breath from her cheek. May I? She tipped her face into the space he had left. He kissed her brow, slow and reverent, his mouth resting where thought shapes itself. It was not claim. It was the beginning of a vow aloud. Mrs. Talbot made a small sound that she pretended was only about the kettle. She made for the door on a pretext she did not bother to invent. I'll see to the lad with the nails, she said, and went to find an errand that would leave them with their heir. Meg watched with her chin propped on the coat's collar. Will you be here in the mornings? She asked, as if a man could be measured in bread and dawn light. If she will have me so, he said. She will, Meg reported, expert and satisfied. She liked the way you held the brick. Anna's laugh came like a crease eased from cloth. She laid the heather on the mantel again. She set 2 cups on the table and a third for a child who always drank with her elbows dignified. She lifted the kettle and poured. Steam wrote itself into the air and then faded where it belonged. They sat, not to negotiate, to be human in a room that had refused other people's stories. The tea was too strong and they did not mind. He reached for the bread and broke it and gave the larger half to Anna, as if he would always be dividing this table with her in that ratio. She took it without demurring because she understood the language of his fingers. When the cups were nearly empty, and the warmth had sunk into their bones and made new courage, he rose. He went to the door and tested the latch again, because habits are vows in disguise. He turned and found Anna watching him. She was not shy. She was not bold. She was exactly what this day had required, equal. He held out his hand. She did not take it. She linked her arm in his instead, the way one walks in lanes where the ruts threaten to throw you off balance if you walk alone. They stood under the low beam and knew they were taller together. The letter lay above the hearth, the heather marking it like a green oath. The new latch clicked. Outside, the Moor breathed. Inside, bread cooled and the fire lowered itself to an ember that will rise again at dusk. The name on the wax had found its answer beside it. The storm had laid down, and in its hush, 2 lives began to speak in the same weather. Thank you so much for listening to this story, all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.